Welcome. In today's video, I have the privilege of interviewing Duncan Burns. Duncan worked as a film and video editor in Hollywood for over 30 years on Emmy-nominated Golden Reel films, but his desire to get fresh fruits and vegetables into his kids' diet brought him to creating the Veggie Dome Fruit Veggie Pod. His experience and personal understanding of plants enabled him to develop a device that displays fresh produce for the family to see and eat throughout the week. The device has been selling nationally, has a utility patent, and his company is scaling production in a current expansion. I had a great time speaking with Duncan. He has an awesome way of bringing in accessible insights and humor into some really powerful life lessons. His origin story was diverse. We got into one of my favorite fields, which is process, documentation, and team alignment. I highly recommend you hear what Duncan has to say. He is a wealth of insight. Without further ado, I give you Duncan Burns. And we're live. Mr. Duncan, welcome.
Hey, good to see you, Logan.
It's good to have you here. After our first conversation, I left the call feeling inspired by the story that you shared with me, your approach to leadership, your enthusiasm for what you're doing. So I've been looking forward to reconnecting with you here today.
Great. I appreciate it. And I like the way you go about things and your approach. It's very positive and also kind of realistic, which is good.
Being realistic is important.
Yeah, that's true.
I appreciate that. Before we hit the red button, we started recording, Duncan. You and I were talking about how oftentimes for someone who's never branched off into a business of their own, who's never pursued the entrepreneurial journey, from the outside it can be intimidating. From the inside it can be intimidating. I think you and I could both attest to that. But for someone who's never started, who's a little further back on the trail than you currently are, the perception could be that it's intimidating, it's daunting, and it requires superpowers to pull off. We said before the call went live, if we've learned anything from the thousands of Marvel films released over the decades, it's that every superhero has an origin story that tells indicates how they achieved their capabilities, their powers. So with that sort of analogy in mind, I would think it'd be awesome to start off with your origin story, the history of what brought you to where you're at today professionally and the project you're currently working on.
Great. Well, that's an interesting thing that you also brought that up, is the kind of origin story is something that when it comes to actually marketing and getting out into the world, it seems that is the kind of substance of what marketing is about is, well, where does this thing come from? What is the story? What is this person's origin? What is the origin of the development or the invention of this idea? And that comes to what the purpose is and what brought it about. But it also reflects upon you, the person who is founding the company, becomes that's part of the story too. They're interested in you. And so I don't want people who are just starting out to be so self-reflective that they're like trying to figure out, well, what's my story? What's my story? You got to go out there and do it first. You got to get out there and take the first 100 steps, I think, and part of that's a mission or a passion of what gets you going and what reason this is coming about. My story really does connect with my full circle, though, in that when I was 7 or 8 and 9 years old, my older brother was interested in plants and biology, and some greenhouses being torn down in the neighborhood nearby my house. And so when they were taking this huge greenhouse down, they're building an orphanage or something like, half a mile away. And they had to get rid of this old greenhouse that was built in 1910 because they didn't want the kids cutting themselves on the glass. Well, they were throwing away all these doors and windows. And my dad and my brother and I pulled up with the station wagon, stacked them inside there, went back home and built a greenhouse. Now, I was the younger brother, so I was, tagging along and helping out. But my brother and my father put together a greenhouse when I was a kid in the backyard, and my brother grew tropical orchids. Now, the reason why that is really something that connects in what I'm doing now is that fast forward 30 years later, I was a dad. I was a film editor, and I can talk a little bit about that too, as to how that formed and shaped myself in these last more years. But in the last, let's say, 10 years, I've been developing a product which is we've called the Veggie Dome, which is the name of the company, but now it's called a fruit and veggie pod because of the way you use it. Keeping fresh vegetables, fresh and fruit out on the table instead of hiding them in the fridge in plastic bags where we're throwing away so much food, and we're also not getting around to eating some of these snacks. We go for the cracker box, which is on the shelf, and we eat it up, and 5 minutes later we're hungry again. Really, there's a lot of research, there's a lot of medical understanding that you have to have much more fruits and vegetables than we have in our current diets. So back to the story of the greenhouse is that I was an editor, and my kids would be coming home. They're pretty young. I mean, like one of them was even in kindergarten, that type of thing. They'd come home from school, and I wanted them to have a really good snack on the table while I was at work. And my wife was there also at the time, but I wanted to make it so that the kids would have some fresh fruit and vegetables sitting out on the table when they came home. When kids or anybody, if it's out on the table, it's fair game, right? Especially if you're coming home from school. So I made this device that I thought, if orchids were growing in the greenhouse. Why is that? Because of the humidity in there, okay? And the humidity is making it so that my brother would actually have these orchids put onto branches. Instead of putting them in pots like everybody buys an orchid, he'd take it out of the pot, he'd take the roots, and he'd put it up against the branch, because that's how they lived in nature. And I asked him, well, if the roots are holding onto the bark and of this branch you have in there, how are they drinking water? The roots are busy, right? They're up on the branch. He said, orchids and bromeliads, they grow from and stay alive from moisture that's in the air. And after that point, I realized that really, and I live in Los Angeles, so it's desert of most area. You look around, there are trees growing. There's nobody watering them, and there's not that much of a water table here. It's very dry. They're drinking the moisture from the air, and they're living. So we don't think about that as much. And I thought, well, with these vegetables and fruit, I could just have some sort of greenhouse type thing on the table, which I did make. Think about a terrarium. And then I wanted to make it so that you would have a lid on top so that the kids could reach in and grab it. And what happens is that made it so that the ethylene gas that the plants made would escape. So I had this device that people say, did you invent it? I'd literally kind of discovered it. It was already something that's in biological existence. Plants give off water. They drink that same water if it stays within the same dome, and their ethylene gas escapes out from the lid that you've made so kids can reach in and grab it. I made this perfect environment for plants to be able to live, for vegetables to be fresh on the table, and fruit too. I mean, it's not, people go, how fresh does it stay? Are the nutrients just as good? And my answer is, they stay alive. They're not just fresh. They're in there as if they're in the field still growing. And now, it's not a thing where you buy this device and say, okay, I'm going to grow I'm going to grow lettuce in here. Guys, it takes 4 months for it to do. You're not going to be waiting around for this lettuce to be growing. It's about buying it at the store, cleaning it, putting it on the table, and then it stays alive for when you're about to eat it. And it's mostly the food that you're about to eat in the next 2 or 3 days. But so think about this. People, and I'm trying to, this is the thing. And I'm going to also then talk to your founders and startups, in that in some way your product has to be able to fit into a life, to be able to make a change to improve people's lives. But that means, does it displace something else, or does it create a space that doesn't exist? So here you are, you've got the problem of getting something into a space, and that means even people's thoughts, that this is something that they want or can use when they're not using it right now. They don't have one. They've never seen one. And so there's that kind of battle that goes on in terms of you being successful and you getting your company into a growth start. Logan, I'm going to defer to you for a little bit and
Sure.
ask you what type of, if I could be talking about, again, I developed that device. I did it after 30 years um, of when I had kids and I was a professional. That whole film editing part was also my beginning, and it's really less of a story about this device that I told you. I keep on putting my hands up. I should have grabbed one, and there's one in the other room. I could bring it over, um, but I actually, my love at the beginning, coming from a family of scientists. My both my brothers have PhDs and did research science. I mean, really incredible stuff. Shooting electrons and protons and seeing them, how the energy transfers within a molecule. Here I am. I I went to school, and I was always making little short films while I was in even junior high school and high school. And I went to college and I took a couple of science classes and thought, this is not for me. I'm not interested in standing around in a lab coat for the next, 40 years. I went towards the film editing, and I went towards the visual arts and communications and making films, making videos. So then, graduating from college, I went to Hollywood because that's where I'm from Los Angeles, and I had a career of working not just as an editor, not just in editing the films together with a director, but also I specialized in the sound editing, and that's what you're doing is you're lining up different types of sounds that are being used. Let's say you're talking to me, you're on a different microphone than I am. Well, those will be at two different channels, so they can be filtered differently. So when they're mixed together, it feels like you're talking to me in the same room, or we're together. Other things that are adding effects like doors and cars and things like that are all different type of channel and all different category. But really what the film editing was it was about teamwork. Because what happens is you get onto a film, you're working with people who have their own script already and have shot it, but also an editor. Everything kind of passes through the editing room. If it's going to be on the screen, you're the one that you see it. And if it's not on the screen, there's decisions with you and the director to not put it in. And of course, that's the majority of the piece. But then there's a whole team of people that gets involved with making sure that film has the coloration and has different sound effects and different things going on. There are teams of people that come on for specific reasons and then they're off. But the editor is the person who literally from the beginning to the end is kind of holding that team and that process together. So one of the things that I learned as an editor, and this is a time when, as I said, film and video, and nowadays it's all digital, right? I went through the period of time where I was literally touching film that had to be a negative cut and spliced together with tape and things like that, whereas it went to digital. And every 3 or 4 months, we'd be having to learn a new system. So I think what I need to get across to some of the folks that are startups and people that are beginning is that I found out that part of the process is what you're actually what your product is. How you do something shapes what you end up with. So the process is something that's important. You got to be aware of what am I doing? Where am I going to end up with? Do I need to? As nowadays, it's like amazing. You can have a film that's out in the movie theaters, or it could be on somebody's phone. Where is it going to end up? What's your audience? Who are your customers? Who is going to be interested in this? And then that's going to shape sometimes how you make it, and also how you package it, so that That's and a good example is the people that for my fruit and veggie pod, they are customers who are interested in their health. Well, I'm not going to be packing it to them in a box that's all filled with styrofoam, so they open it up and the stuff flies all over the room. My customers aren't going to necessarily like that. They're going to have something more. What is it called when it's regenerative type of materials? The something that is not going to be plastic in their house is just we made folding cardboard pieces to hold this piece of glass. And it's interesting that these kind of concepts of how can I direct this, how can I make this so that my customers, my sector, are going to be aligned with it and like it. So that's something that I've had to learn. And that packet or the idea of process was actually something I learned in editing films because almost every film that I edited had some other. First of all, it had some different source, different ways, and it could have been a documentary shot in a different country, or it could be just something that was shot in LA. But then that had to be shaped towards what are we going to be making? How long is it going to be? How much technical and even legal binds need to be covered, or guidelines need to be dealt with to be able to make that product finish properly. So that's really what I think. One thing that I can say about myself is that I'm kind of a finisher. I stay with stuff and I make it get done. And that's what an editor does, right? But also in my business now, I'm very involved with. I think follow through is important, and follow through is really getting it done. And part of that follow through is how do you start off with something to be able to end properly with it? How do you get that finish? Sometimes you don't know. Sometimes you just have to hash it out, and you'll be kind of, you'll be making mistakes. You're going to be making mistakes. Count on it. But then, in fact, you learn from those mistakes, and hopefully they're not too costly. But also, there's a focus of talking to people who I think are like our mentors, are good along the way that help you shape what what mistakes you can avoid. But again, as you're starting something that's new, it doesn't have a fit before. Sometimes your mentors, you can listen to them a lot, but you can't. They don't know. They didn't come up with your idea. They don't know your story. They don't know your sector necessarily. So you're still going to have to rough it out. Logan, what else? Or what direction should I cover more?
Sure. Thanks for breaking that down, Duncan. There's a few very interesting things that I think we could unpack further. One of them was the point you made about the importance of process. Now, I want to reflect back some of what you said and see if I'm accurately characterizing it. And then perhaps you do a second pass through the concept. I think it's was really interesting. So the importance of process, but understanding the ends. Like
Right.
where is this all going? Who is it going to be for? So keeping the ends or the intent and outcomes in mind. You also touched on this variability and adaptability piece to the puzzle, which is there's this A to Z shepherding of a process where you're receiving the inputs, you're doing collaboration and team alignment throughout the various steps of the process to get it towards a designated outcome. But you talked about how you were working in analog days, cutting film, stitching it together with tape, and seeing the technology evolve. So being so there's this interesting part that I think it would be really cool to hear you talk about, where a process has, if you imagine a linear order of operations, it has its
Okay.
steps. It's like you talked to the variability within those steps,
Yeah.
but there's also adaptability to the process of a whole because you're using different mediums, different tools, different tech, going from analog
Right.
to digital. So I just thought that was a really interesting, multifaceted approach. And you talked about that being a key lesson learned for you. And I would love to hear you just kind of do a
Yeah.
second pass through and re-illuminate that
Yeah.
concept for us.
Okay. So the idea of process comes from, at least in the when I was an editor, from actually repeating certain things and seeing what do I need to do to get from A to B to C to D with that process. So you're shooting a film. Here's an example. You something comes in. It's somewhat even not identified necessarily. What is they know what scenes maybe were shot, and the many times you'll have an assistant editor go through it and mark the shots, and not just know what take it is and what part of the script it is, but also mark the exact spot where the picture of the slate comes down, because that'll match up with some other piece of audio that has to match up with that slap of that specific shot, that specific part of the script, but that specific frame where that thing hit. So that person lines it up. So I'm just described you a process of syncing the dailies. Okay, that's what that was. What there's going to be, as many as 4 to 8 to 10 shots of a scene of a character saying one piece of dialogue of 120 pages of a script. So there's a lot of material coming in, but that one piece that comes in, you will have a process that it'll be marked in a certain way. You'll look at it a certain way, but there's also a process of the editor himself who's looking at that film. The first time you look at something is different from the 50th time you've seen it, right? You're looking at different things, and you're actually looking at some of the shots more times than that. But the process is something that you have let's say, as I said, the assistant is syncing the dailies, that what happens is you see that there are certain key points that you're doing, and if you do it with the same pen, and that pen is on that part of the table and you can reach for it and you can grab it or mark it, or if that button on the computer is there to mark the end of the scene, then you realize that there is, what if you move the pen on your desk over to the other side? All of a sudden your process has changed. Okay, and you obviously do the things that are feeling natural to you to be able to have the tools that you want and the markings and the media that you are working with, or the data or the product that you're working with is in a specific spot. When you start moving things, you set it up in a natural way, but when you start noticing, okay, now every time I'm just using that pen for a physical example, but every time I reach for that pen, I'm slowing down. How can I make it so that I'm better? So your process, even the where you're putting your tools or where you're thinking about it, can make a slight change. Now, if you have a process that's organized, you can just change one or two things and see how that affects your workflow. Okay, so that is why, again, that process is something that if you can make it then even really get automatic, or automatic in your own fashion, you can have something like that going on and then be doing something else at the same time. There's one thing that I was very good at in editing, is that I would have multiple processes going on sometimes, and I would know that it's getting done properly because I set up a certain process. As soon as it's at point F and G, I knew that A, B, C, D, E was taken care of. So there's an organizational aspect of it that is really good in your work, in your workflow. So that's good, but you also don't want to get trapped in a certain process. It's very possible, and many of us are like that. You get a new software or something for your computer, and you end up being able to use it by doing a certain set of keys, and then somebody reaches over and goes, yeah, all you have to do is push this key here, and all that, you can do it with that. You do little workarounds without knowing it, just because you're doing it. So it's good to have an awareness of your own process. You're also not going to cling on to it, because you want to be able to make some adjustments to it to make it flow. And sometimes things really change, like all of a sudden, well, now they're not shooting the film on it. They're shooting some video shots, so they're coming in differently. you've got to change your process because of some external reason. Something else happened. So all of a sudden, it's not coming to you the same way. You have to be able to readapt. But guess what? Your knowledge of having had a process already enables you to try to map on maybe a new way to treat this new thing that's coming through. So and what I'm trying to do now in my mind is try to kind of spread that out to other things that people really have in their workflow. Okay, because not everybody's going to be making movies and making videos here, but it is an aspect that even let's say your emails that come in every day. Is there a process that you have to make it so that you're effectively answering people and then not having to deal with a lot of other stuff that you don't think you have to deal with, and yet be able to address that when it's not going to drop through the cracks? So there are processes that you should maybe design or think of in how you even communicate and are corresponding with people in your business. Not everybody expects that you have to send their email back the same day or the next day. Maybe those people can be kept on a Tuesday afternoon pile or something like that. Think about that as part of your way of making a process so that you can then know, okay, it's Tuesday late afternoon. I know I've taken care of all those emails that I kept for 2 days. Now I know I can relax and think about the other things that I have to take care of because I've grouped it in a certain way that I know, oh yeah, you know what? I know I'm not taking care of that, but I know by Tuesday afternoon, I'm going to be able to get back to those businesses or correspondences that I've had to keep on because of the other ones that are hot ones that are things that are really pinging on my communication here. So that's the part about process that I wanted to say is that there are ways in which you can set something up. There are ways you should be able to always be changing your process, always be changing it to not because you want to change it, but because there are improvements that as you are experienced, you realize that you can kind of do a couple more things more effectively. But then you also have to be able to ditch the process and get a new one because external life is going to be throwing stuff at you. So there's a little bit of structure that I think that is invaluable that I've learned, and I learned it in putting feature films together and things like that. I take it to my business now, and I know that I can count on my structure so I can relax and start thinking of other things I need to do.
Duncan, from the perspective of a business owner, there's and process specifically as it pertains to like operational processes within a business. That's the key activities that team members and teams collectively are doing to get work done and to move things forward to get those outcomes. How do you think about the skill mobility piece or like the transferring of the knowledge of processes? For example, on the one end, it's all on the job training. It's tribal knowledge. It exists in the head and it's transferred
Right.
through like the oral tradition, right? It's communicated. It's sit next to me and watch how it's done and we'll talk about it. It's like all implicit. And then there's the far opposite end of the spectrum, which is there's a handbook this thick of all of the SOPs and processes that are documented
Right.
in black and white form. Uh, where do you fall on that axis? Maybe it's not black and white. Maybe there's room for both, a kind of stacking documented process with on-the-job, person-to-person training. But what camp are you in, and what's your perspective on the importance of documenting and distributing processes within a team and in a business context?
Well, that's a really difficult question to answer because what happens is there are ways in which if you are giving somebody else, even on your team, a way to do something, they have to kind of adapt, and maybe there's a resistance to that, or even a feeling that it's not for them, that you're kind of impinging upon them. So there are ways in which you want to do things as a procedure in a company, right? And people understand, oh yeah, you know what? The reason why we do this is that we don't want to make our customers angry because we are addressing something that has come up in the past. That is something that you can catch from a repeated thing. Like customers seem to be complaining that they don't know when the box is going to get there. Now we have it so that not only is it being sent out to them, but then a day or two later, we're saying it should be there soon. You know what I mean? So there is something that is a structure that can be used in the communications. But, you know, to be able to, as you were actually even asking that question, I thought of my own company and I thought of my own communications with them. There are times when I send out emails to my team and I don't get a response back from it. And it's something that I'm telling them to do, or here's some information I came across. And I think that it's good to have kind of a repartee, a thing where, you know what, even if you don't have any time, but you see the email from me and you open it up, just type in the word okay, and then I know that you got it, as opposed to it didn't get to them. So I think that there are ways in which you can tell them, can you do that? Can you please communicate back to me when I've sent you an email? But even if it just is, I know that it's opened, and you push the letter K on there, that would be good. So that is, I think, something that you communicate as a team. I think you should develop some of these things. If you're going to have a system, if you're going to have a communication, or a way in which you approach specific problems of the company in a certain way, I think you got to have your team in a meeting in a certain way, because whatever system you have needs to be a system that it agrees with their way of working. If it's a real problem for them to do something and you're telling them to do it, there's going to be resistance there, and there's going to be an effect that's going to slow things down. So I think if you're going to have systems that you are putting upon a team, you could potentially put it out there and say, listen, I want you guys to do this. I think that we need to take care of this problem and in this way. What do you think? And be open to their suggestions. They'll potentially come up with stuff that they've done before that it solves that problem and makes it smoother. The system needs to be shared, but also then it needs to be birthed by the people in the team. Then it becomes theirs. Then they walk away. They've got the system here, and it becomes a mode of behavior. It definitely helps people out in this world now, where we're dealing with so much emails and communications and various things that are giving us the next piece of data. We really have to get organized if you're a core team on what are we going to be focused on, how are we going to take it through, and by the way, how can we package it for ourselves to consume and understand, and we can pass by it then if it's not something that we're going to be staying with. Got to be able to have systems that they share. Right? That would be a good. I'm actually going to have a meeting with my team. There's some things that we should be able to work with that are systems of correspondence. That you have to get those things organized nowadays, because guess what? It takes us hours of the day to be corresponding nowadays, especially to run a business, especially to be marketing and dealing with customers. So that has to be mapped out as a process.
You're speaking my language on that front.
Great.
Thank you for breaking that down, Duncan. I'll reflect back the point you made about, hitting the K button. You got the email, you got it. The systems of correspondence, and even before that, it would be important to address. I like the answer of that, the balance that you establish between there's a need for some documentation. There's a need for a lot of adaptability, where you can't impose a process or procedure in all instances. And But in some, for example, the case you brought up, we send a notification to our customers 2 days after shipping to ensure they get an update. There's cases where discernment has to be applied, where that's just what we do. Um,
Right.
but there's other cases where the intent and the objective is the guiding light. It's the North Star, and the means by which that intent is achieved is left to the individual, which brings us to the point you said of making getting the having helping the team own the process, making it their own. That agency oriented approach where people feel a sense of control over what they're doing. Um, there's a precedent in the military with what you're saying on that response, that correspondence system. The author and Navy SEAL Commander Jocko Willink talks. He gives it the term a read back. You can imagine it on a radio. If it's Duncan, this is Logan. Come in, Duncan. Right, and we're doing that radio back and forth. It's copy that, Roger that, you got it. That way, otherwise you're on the end of the radio like, did he get my transmission or not? The one dude's waiting. So the read back concept is on one end that it's so critical to have that acknowledgement. But Jocko takes it one step further, which I really love, and I've seen it accelerate the momentum of projects because it improves the cohesion and alignment of teams. And that is having, in certain instances, when a task is delegated, as an example, to request a read back from the individual to
Logan,
say,
let me bring up a point.
by all means.
You've just really rang a bell there, and that is that when you do have these systems and when you do have an agreement as to how to do something and you follow through on it, let's say, then it actually creates additional solutions. Let me explain that. I send an email to my person. I don't necessarily know if they've read it, but also it's something that it's on my mind. And once I send it out, it's out there, and I don't necessarily have it on my checklist anymore. That person gets it. They put the word K on it. They don't have time to answer me or anything, but they send it back to me. Guess what? That does. It gets me an email with that same subject and that same subject on in front of me again. So I'm going, oh yeah, we're talking about that. So all of a sudden, because I'm just telling this person, just tell me that you got the email with a K on it, it actually makes it so that we as a team are still in discussion on this subject matter and we're dealing with this problem. I can keep that unopened one in my mailbox going, oh yeah, I'm going to remind tomorrow when I get up, I'm going to see this thing that he sent me K, and I'm going to continue following that up. And it's not just disappeared into the ethos. So it presents other solutions. If you work together as a team and you know a system, not only can you rely on that system, but it starts making you all more effective in other ways.
Keeps the idea alive and growing.
Right.
That's awesome. What haven't we discussed that we should?
I'm not sure. I have I wanted to be able to bring one of my units out here and kind of play with it in front of you in the camera, but I don't know if that's okay. I mean, it is a large part of my life, but it doesn't necessarily have to be there. And I did talk about the film editing for years. Really, what it was an interesting shift. So let me bring one over, and I'll if it's not a good prop, I'll
by all means.
It's just right in the other room. There. So I don't even know how it's going to look visually. You can see that there are certain vegetables and stuff in it. And I talked to you about how it does have this cookie jar lid type thing that I made that so my kids could reach in. Okay. And of course, most of the time when I come in that house, it's like that because they don't put the lid back in. That's like kids. But you just put the lid back on, and a couple of minutes later, it creates the environment. And I don't know if you can see it also. but it's got a lot of kind of moisture along the sides. That's all created by the plants, and they live on it. And the cool things that I've learned about moisture and plants with this thing is that if you wash them and put them in the refrigerator in a plastic bag, a lot of times there's drops in there. That's can be where bacteria can grow. And what happens is these anything like a puddle or some that's water that's on the plant is actually something that it can create a bacteria growth. It can kind of spoil. But what it does, what I've done with this device, is that it's emitting moisture in atmospheric condition. Okay, it is just like in the air. So it's not sitting in water. It's not got water on it. It's only just drinking it from the atmosphere, which makes it keeps it alive and keeps it really fresh. So this has been a real, I mean, even though I kind of knew it worked, it took me many times or many years even to figure out how could use this tool. And it has worked. I mean, for many people we've sold 7,000 of them, whatever. But for me, it took me actually the first couple of years to realize that number one, I don't need to put water in there. I mean, you just assume, oh, I better put it in there. Jungle forest, we need to have water, moisture in the air, like that. No, I found out after a couple of years to not wash it and put it in there like that. But actually, if it's getting a little bit too damp, this one's kind of damp. But if it's drier and just the air inside has the humidity, it's working the best for the plant because there's no bacteria growing on anything. It's just drinking the water. So anyway, that's this thing has consumed my time. And once I invented it and put it on top of my table, I honestly looked at my career as a film editor. And it's interesting because when you're growing up and you're looking at films, you're seeing how films literally change your life sometimes. They're powerful things. But now, after so many years of seeing films, I'm like looking at them almost like an irritation, like, my God, people are just watching other people's stories go through. Why can't they go out the door and live their own life? So it's interesting how my perspective of film editing and looking at films changed when I actually started looking at this and saying, gosh, I'm at the same time as I was developing this in my house. I mean, almost 15 years ago. Okay. I actually read a book, and the book was about diets and about nutrition. And it's called the China Study. And it was a study that took place that since it was less expensive to go to China and study all these villages, 6,500 villages were studied. What are they eating? What ailments do they have? What types of things are going on with even pregnancies and diseases? And then, compare it to what they're eating. And the person who was actually the lead person of the study wrote the book, The China Study. He came from a dairy farm. I mean, he was trying to prove how milk protein was good for you. He found out completely the opposite with his study. And so, what happened when I was developing this idea for snacks for my kids, I actually learned that if you do eat more fresh fruits and vegetables in your diet, you can actually reverse heart disease and type 2 diabetes and some cancers. And there's huge numbers of studies that are out now that are peer-reviewed papers that are people saying, my God, you can make it so that these, what we call chronic diseases that are affecting so many Americans. I mean, a vast majority of Americans are now overweight, are not having good health. It's because of what we're eating. And so I got excited, and this is how I left the film editing career. Was like, I really don't care about looking at ads and selling products and stuff like that. I never would have really thought, but I thought, you know what? You put these in a bunch of people's houses and they will start thinking about and eating their vegetables more. It's actually something that is, I think, basically a good change that could take place in our kind of thoughts on food in America. We see stuff, we eat it. Well, if this is sitting on the table, you walk by this carrot 15 times, you'll end up eating it by the end of the day.
That's
So
true.
I was then become passionate about the idea that I can be part of a change. And not only can I be part of a change, I can provide the tool that enables that change to take place. So I got excited about that, and it's a company it's taken quite a long time, and maybe that's one thing that I can say to your founders and startups that again, I'm coming to the subject matter of you're going to be having resistance in the world in putting something in the world that isn't there right now. You gotta either you're not pushing stuff away necessarily, but you're certainly having to make room for it in people's lives, and then they have to figure it out and they have to look at it and kick the tires. And that you're choosing a product that you want, you're passionate about, you better kick the tires and have all your friends kick the tires and have your mom kick the tires and have your older brother too. Have it's going to be put through a storm in terms of people looking at it and checking it out and seeing if this is right. Is this going to be purchased at the right price? That's another kicking of the tires. But even just like, is this going to make a change in my life? Because if you can make a good change and it's something that does fit in people's lives, they don't care as much about the price if it's something that really makes a difference. And of course, you want to be able to make it so that it's a price that people can afford. So there's that aspect of there. But if you don't really feel strongly about this product and about something that it's going to do in changing and helping people's lives, it's going to be a tough go. You gotta be able to have that basis for your motivation, I think, because it's not easy. It's not. It's there's. Just think about it as a storm. That's what I'm telling you. You're going to be bringing your idea and your company in through a bunch of storms, and if it survives the storms really well, there's a certain pride to that. It's like, you know what? See, I told you, right? But if it doesn't, you have to be able to say, what changes do I need to make? And so that's an effect on that. We were talking about again the subject matter of what I've just opened up. What was that? Um,
Well, I can provide you with a quick read back on some of
yeah,
what you covered there a moment ago,
right.
Duncan.
And whether or not I kind of completed it. Yeah.
I think you did a fantastic job closing the loop.
Okay. Good.
Uh, you're a wealth of insight and inspiration on top of that. I love the origin story, the principles you extracted from your time as a film editor, and how all of that applies to where you're at now in a business owner's capacity, but also the story of identifying a problem, seeing a need or an opportunity in your personal life, solving that, and the iterations that you had to go through, learning over time, applying the formal body of knowledge on how to ensure that the bacteria is not growing because of more water being on the plant, as an example, and
Right.
applying the research from the China study and seeing that this and connecting that to a larger passion and purpose behind the organization, which is not just having a role in making a change, but also providing a tool that enables that change. It's really encouraging, and I think you've done a fantastic job at presenting these big ideas in an accessible and impactful way. So, as we look at landing the plane here, I would ask you to share, give us a little bit of a clue on what comes next, and perhaps that's where we plant the flag for what could easily be another discussion. What comes next for Duncan Burns, for your project, for the organization?
Right. As I've put on a lot of effort and time into this company, it's been a hard push, and I really, at the time, you think that when you even just make the first prototype patent, I've forgotten what the first one is called. It starts with a P. Um, But the first concept of putting your patent in the
Proof of concept.
what?
Proof of concept.
Yeah, proof of concept. But what I'm actually saying is, when you first make up the patent, it's an easy one to do. You can, like, find, I mean, it's $100 or something like that, and you've got about a year or some period of time to actually go through and say, okay, I actually want to make this into a patent. Let's say a design patent. That first time when you put it out there, you think, oh my goodness, I'm started and here goes. And it is something where, if it's a good idea and you're really passionate about it, it's going to be a longer time than that. It's something that, where just because the idea is out there in your patent sheet and that you're talking about having a company, there are so many steps. But again, a journey of 1,000 steps starts with one or two good steps. And once you've done that, though, it's the follow through that I feel has been really important. So what's my next step is that, actually, after a couple years of trying to make it so that I can go to the next level through a larger investment, I'm going to the point where we're going to turn a corner with my company. We're changing the idea and we're going to do a group raise. And so that's a different animal. It's not just a one-on-one type of thing, but many of the materials that I have developed for the one-on-one investor conversations now can be brought to a larger group of people. And I've got so much more going because of these times when I've been moving forward a slight bit and then having to push another wall down and then find another doorway. Each time I've actually gotten stronger and gotten better perspective. So wish me well on this next journey. I'm using everything I've got now over the last couple of years to then go to that next step. And I have now a vision of how it's going to be brought to market, how it's going to be designed in terms of its shape and what the product is, how the relationships are that I'm going to be bringing it into a lifestyle sector. I've been in contact with people and companies. Every single step that I've done, try to hold that into your basket and keep it alive, because you're going to then take that next step that you don't know about and I think take it to the next level. But don't be impatient.
Well, you have a supporter out of me, Duncan. I'm rooting for you. I'm
Thank
excited to see how the next chapter of your journey unfolds. And I think this is a perfect place to plant the flag for us to pick it back up in our next conversation.
Super. This has really
You're,
been a learning experience for me too, to have it out there. And I'm going to do some things different now that I've talked to you.
it's been an honor having you on today, Duncan. Thanks
All
for
right.
joining us.
Take care. Have a good day.